Guys, Comic Boom here to review Superman issue 23. And this is my third review today. So, third review, second Corona Light. It's a beautiful day. The birds keep chirping, so I might as well keep chirping too, right? Chirping out these reviews, because frankly, I've just been too damn busy. And I'm sorry to guys that, to any viewers out there that actually enjoy my videos and regularly watch me. I haven't been putting out a lot lately. I've just been so busy and spending a lot of time with family. And to be honest with you, as I've said before in some of my past videos, I'm really enjoying the the time that I'm not working. I've just really enjoyed spending time in the backyard and just sort of relaxing and reading books and just sort of reading some novels and just other things as well, not just comic books. And one of the reasons why, comic books are a little bit, particularly Superman, as you know, I've sort of ranted and raved about, sorry, I've ranted, I haven't raved about Superman in a long time, but I've ranted about Superman, so I have not really been very excited about Superman, quite frankly. I'm going to be reviewing Deceased Dead Planet. If you want to read about the potential of what 5G could have been, about a new Justice League, you got to read Tom Taylor's Deceased Dead Planet, because that is awesome. But I want to. This is going to be a quick review about Superman issue 23. This, on the surface, this is an issue. Again, it's written by Bendis, artist Kevin Maguire. Great art by Kevin Maguire. I've always liked Kevin Maguire's art. He's very emotive. He can draw very good. He draws a lot of. All his characters have. I love the facial expressions he put on his characters. I've loved Kevin Maguire going all the way back to the classic Justice League International. Now, strangely enough, I think Kevin Maguire's particular style, which I love, I actually think it's not suited for the topic of this particular issue. And on the surface here, Bendis tries to throw in sort of a lot here. He has Superman visiting, I think, the Hall of Justice, meets the Wonder Twins, and he's having a meeting with Dr. Fate. And the reason why he's asked to meet with Dr. Fate is that he wants Dr. Fate to check him out to see if mystically anything's wrong with him, because Lois and Batman have been worried about Superman lately, apparently. This is where it gets interesting, okay? This is where it gets really interesting, because apparently Lois and Batman, they're worried about Superman because they just think he's a little bit off, and they're kind of worried about him because he's what he's been through lately. Now, this is where I'm gonna get a little bit ranty. All right, what has Superman been through lately? Okay, well, first of all, Superman has been through obviously a lot. Let's just go through it real quick, shall we? Now, Superman has, number one, he's got a terrible wife. That's the first thing. Lois is a bitch. I've said this before, and it's a fact. She's just not a very good wife. She's not a good wife, and she's a terrible mother. Now, if you're somebody who's raised in Kansas with two arguably of the best parents on the planet Earth, Jonathan and Martha Kent, imagine the disappointment growing up. Imagine showing young Clark Kent a picture of Lois Lane and describing to her her actions. That you're going to have a son one day, young Clark. You're going to have a son that looks just like you, and you're going to marry someone, and she's going to abandon him and encourage you to abandon him to the 31st century. Now imagine how that would go over to young Clark Kent. He'd probably kill himself before his 12th birthday. But it is what it is, you know. But let's assume that, you know, you swallow the nonsense that Lois Lane she's a tough, independent woman, and she believes in being a great mother, and she's balancing the challenges of being an award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, and that she's doing a very brave thing, you know, encouraging her son to be his own person after he's aged up 7 years in an alternate dimension on Earth 3, trapped in a volcano for 7 years, leaving aside the fact that she doesn't express any concern about his mental well-being. You know, she expresses concern about Superman's well-being, her husband's well-being, apparently, but she doesn't seem to think that maybe being 7 years trapped in a volcano and being psychologically tormented by Ultraman is not going to screw up her 10-year-old son's life, who now suddenly is 17. But let's be blunt, if you're 10 years old and you spend 7 years in a volcano being psychologically tortured and you suddenly escape, you're still really a 10-year-old in your mind in a 17-year-old body. But that's something that's never really been addressed by Bendis. It's still not. But Superman knows this. He must. And what I at least like about this issue is that Bendis is at least acknowledging it. I actually think that this issue was forced on him, because Bendis was forced to realize, he probably watched a couple of YouTube videos from pretty much anybody who's reviewed his writing and for Superman and said, you know what, maybe I should address the elephant in the room, namely that Lois is a terrible mother, she's a terrible wife, that Superman, they've lost their son, that they had a they've had a psychopathic grandfather by the name of Jor-El. He's acted crazily. We had to break down to the source wall. Superman's life is complete chaos. And then in the midst of this chaos, he's nonsensically revealed his secret identity. So his entire world's upside down. He's essentially the only person that he's got what we call. See, I'm a lawyer by occupation, and see, there's a certain term that we use for friends that try to help our clients out. We call them negative advocates. Okay. You'll know what I'm talking about when I give you. See, a negative advocate, they're frustrating to deal with, because there's nothing worse than when somebody comes to you for help and you're more than willing to help them, but it's hard to help them because they got their little friends in the background giving them advice. We call them negative advocates. If you want my help, listen to me, not the people around you. If you don't want my help, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But if you ask for it, especially if you're paying for it, listen to what I tell you. Just saying, what you're doing ain't working. It's got to be a reason you're asking advice from me, right? Anyways, I digress. But Superman here is asking for advice from Dr. Fate. Now, why he's asking for a help from Dr. Fate, especially not the experienced Dr. Fate, who is Kent Nelson, but he's asking for help from Khalid Nasur, who is essentially, I guess he's a doctor, he's got some experience, but he doesn't really have the type of superhero experience that Superman should be asking Dr. Fate advice on. But in any event, it is what it is. I like Khalid, he's a good character, and he does his best to help. And Khalid himself even is shocked. Khalid is shocked when Superman is telling him. Khalid is piecing together here. I'm going to give Bendis some credit in the way he writes the scene. Normally, Bendis' dialogue drives me crazy. But there was some moments of humor here where even Khalid was shocked at what Superman was saying. I mean, oh my God, you lost your son to the 31st century. You what? And your father was your father was crazy, and your father was tried, and your father did all this and all this. All the nonsense with the Unity and the Unity Day and Kandor was destroyed and the destruction of Krypton and all these new revelations and your son age, all this stuff. I mean, Khalid himself is almost overwhelmed listening to Superman regale him with what's happened to Superman. Bear in mind, this is just in the last 2 years of Superman's, in the last 2 years worth of comic books. So probably the last year of Superman's life, if you want, in continuity terms, I guess you could say. Realistically, but more like 6 months. In any event, an extraordinary amount of what would normally be considered profoundly traumatic events from an emotional perspective have bombarded Superman's life. Now, what's fascinating here, and what I find I can't help but chuckle, is Lois and Batman figure that I can see Batman thinking that Superman probably needs some counseling or some help, maybe get some perspective. What I find astonishing here is that Lois thinks that Superman needs help? Talk about a narcissist. I mean, Lois has to suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. I mean, the profound narcissism, it boggles my mind. If anybody is in deep denial and completely is devoid of any degree of self-awareness, it's Lois Lane. Get that woman some counseling, or at a minimum, get Clark Kent a divorce lawyer. especially now since he's free, he's revealed his secret identity. I'm Clark Kent, I'm Superman. It's not as if he's going to have a hard dating life. I mean, come on, it's going to be pretty easy for him to find somebody to replace her with. I mean, it's not like he's got a family, right? I mean, what? It's not like John Kent's ever going to come back from the 31st century to find out that his dad's not with his mom anymore. And besides, even if John Kent did find out that his parents were separated, what the hell does he care? He doesn't seem to give a shit about anything. He's in the 31st century, right? See where I'm going with this? So this whole thing seems to be kind of humorous to me, and I have a fun time reading it. I'm not going to lie. I had a fun time reading this. It's fun. It's fun. Listen to the birds. See, the birds agree with me, for God's. Even the birds don't like Bendis. Sorry. I'm just, listen. Even Mother Nature, right? Come on, anyways. But I just sort of throw my hands up in the air at this point, because it does seem that with all the nonsense that has gone on with Superman, Bendis is pretty much has to write this story, because there has to be some acknowledgement at some point that all this craziness in Superman's life, if it doesn't at some point have an impact on him psychologically, then it's going to be a huge black mark on Bendis's run. I think it already is, because it already doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that the way Bendis is approaching this, I think that there's no way that you can avoid what this should involve is a great deal of discussions between Clark and Lois. This should involve them putting their foot down about John Kent, doing more investigations in terms of what happened to him on Earth 3 when he lost those 7 years, or when he was aged up those 7 years. That's where the real story lies. That's what I'm interested in. I want to know what happened during those 7 years. It couldn't have been that John Kent was simply trapped in a volcano. He must have had an adventure on Earth 3. He must have done more. That's where the story lies. Show me the adventure of a young John Kent who's between the ages of 10 and 16 having adventures on Earth 3 after he escapes the volcano. And what friends did he make on Earth 3? That's where the story lies. So if we can't have Super Sons here, maybe he inspired friendships on Earth 3 and had his own Damian Kent on Earth 3 that he befriended. And maybe if you want to tell me an inspirational story about John Kent, tell me the story of a young John Kent who escapes psychological torment on Earth 3 in a volcano, but despite still being trapped on Earth 3 for 5 to 7, up to 7 years, that he at least has a positive impact on a world where good is evil and evil is good. That's where the story lies. But DC doesn't understand that. Bendis doesn't even appreciate that. He doesn't grasp that. Instead, we get these nonsense stories that are just sort of pathetic. And I want to go back to a point I made about Kevin Maguire's art. I love Kevin Maguire. He's got my full compliments here, man. He did his job. And he's really good at facial expressions. Unfortunately, the reason why it doesn't work in this issue is that every time I see Kevin Maguire's art, as much as I love it, to me it's better, it's more suited for comedic storytelling. I keep thinking of Justice League International, and when Superman makes an expression when he's talking to Dr. Fate in this issue, and when he's talking to Khalid, and he's talking about profoundly disturbing emotional events that have occurred in his life, it just looks like he's making light of it. It's hard to take everything seriously when Superman doesn't seem to take it seriously. And the art doesn't suit the mood. If ever, I'll be blunt with you, if ever there was a comic book where Alex Maleev's art, the Talking Heads, Alex Maleev's somber, depressing kind of looking art, which Bendis seems to love so much, that's frankly what this should be. Because this is a depressing topic. Superman's had a depressing year. He's got a wife that's been horrible. She left him alone. She doesn't even care what he thinks. For weeks she was in Metropolis. She comes back from space. Doesn't even tell her that she left her son with her psychotic grandfather in space. Comes back for 2 weeks. Doesn't even tell him that she's around. And then doesn't seem to care that her son is going to be lost in the 31st century. And then she just basically does what she wants. She resents when Superman rescues her, despite the fact that clearly she'd be dead 10 times over if her husband didn't. There's so many hypocritical things. Superman is not appreciated. He's not appreciated by his wife. He's not appreciated by his son. He doesn't have much of a good relationship with his son. His son doesn't even want to be around him anymore. His son hadn't seen him for 7 years and doesn't seem to care. He's going to abandon him to the 31st century. I could go on and on and on. And this is depressing shit. This is depressing shit. And yet, hey, let's make light of it. In fact, how do we make light of it even more? Let's get that great artist that can that I laughed every time I saw his art because it was so good, because he was making people laugh and tell sarcastic jokes all the time. Kevin McGuire, yeah, let's have him draw the issue to make light of all the miserable things that are happening in Superman's life while he talks to a complete and utter stranger called Dr. Fate, a guy named Khalid, who he's never had a conversation with before. Or worse yet, why don't we just, let's have him talk about Adam Strange, another guy who's had zero relationship with at any point in his life. Let's have that relationship expanded upon too. Yes, let's do that. Let's have Superman talk not to his close friends, or let's not have Superman talk to Jimmy Olsen. By the way to go, Jimmy. Way to be there for your best friend. And is there a reason why Bendis doesn't have Superman confide in Jimmy Olsen? Now, you might say, well, Jimmy Olsen's a doofus. I would agree with you, Jimmy Olsen is a doofus. And it doesn't help that Matt Fraction continues to write him like a doofus. It doesn't help that there's been no actual development or character evolution of Jimmy Olsen in 40 years in the entire DC pantheon, mythology, etc., etc. But hey, it is what it is. The opportunities here to actually move the characters that are centrally part of the Superman mythology are huge, and none of them have been built upon, and none of that has been actually done. So many levels of disappointment here in terms of how the approach to Superman has been taken, and this is just par for the course. This is why I might as well drink when I read this. I had two prior to this. In any event, the reality is that at this point I just sort of shake my head. And I'm just waiting for the days for Bendis to get off the title so we can get actual meaningful character development. I guarantee you that when we finally get somebody who talks about, when we get a story where Superman actually confronts the fact that his father arguably betrayed, well, actually, that's just it. He never defended his father. Jor-El was innocent. We never got to see the trial of Jor-El. Superman never got to see the trial of Jor-El. Sentence was passed on his father before he could even have input into it. Superman doesn't stand up for himself. He's weak. He's pathetic. This is no longer Superman. They should call this issue Clark Kent, because one of the saddest things I've seen and the worst consequences of the character of the secret identity reveal, the worst thing that has happened is that rather than Clark Kent becoming Superman, we have Superman becoming everything weak that Clark Kent represented. Superman has embraced. And don't let the Mongol issue fools you. Superman is really good in a fight. Yeah, he beats up Mongol. Yeah, he's real tough as Superman. Blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle. It doesn't matter. What really matters and what really tests your character is how are you with your family, your friends? Do you stand up for yourself? Do you stand up for your integrity? Do you say what you actually feel? And Superman doesn't. And if this is his idea of standing up for himself, he's pathetic. Rant over. Grab a Corona, go outside, listen to some birds, get away from comic books once in a while, and follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. And until next time, Comic Boom out.